Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, I want you, the listener, to just imagine standing in front of a massive crowd. You are delivering a masterclass on the terrifying, relentless speed of human mortality.
Right, and the absolute inevitability of the grave.
Yeah, you are looking out at this sea of faces, telling them that their lives are just, well, melting away by the second. And now imagine doing that the very night before your 21st birthday.
It completely shatters our standard expectations of who actually gets to speak with authority about death.
It really does.
Usually, we expect those kinds of reflections from someone at the end of their days looking backward. We expect the weary philosopher. But here you have a young man looking forward, seeing the sheer velocity of the cliff approaching.
Which brings us to the mission of this deep dive. For you, the listener, we have a fascinating historical document sitting on the table today. We are pulling apart a manuscript from Charles H. Spurgeon.
Specifically, sermon number 3126.
Yeah, titled Pictures of Life. He roots the entire discourse in a single massive question posed in the biblical text of James chapter 4, verse 14, which simply asks, what is your life?
Such a huge question.
Right. So our goal today is to unpack Spurgeon's vivid, rapid-fire metaphors regarding the brevity, the uncertainty, the constant shifting, and the final conclusion of our mortal days.
And he does not hold back either. I mean, he throws a relentless barrage of imagery at the audience.
Oh.
It is an aggressive, breathless analysis designed to just shake the listener awake to the reality of how fast the clock is actually ticking. He is systematically paring down the human illusion that we have an endless supply of tomorrows.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because there's a historical detail framing this text that is utterly staggering.
Yeah.
Spurgeon delivered this on the evening of June 18th, 1855. He was born on June 19th, 1834.
So he is 20 years old, standing on the absolute threshold of adulthood.
Yeah, and that is an age where most people feel entirely invincible. Your whole life is ahead of you, your physical strength is peaking, and yet he is speaking with massive gravity about the end of days.
And you have to consider the context of London in 1855.
Right.
This is a city intimately acquainted with sudden death. They were dealing with recurring, devastating cholera outbreaks. The mortality rates, especially for young people and children, were just staggering.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, death was not a sanitized concept hidden away in hospitals. It was a visible daily reality in the streets. So when this 20-year-old kid stands up in the pulpit and starts talking about how fast the grave approaches, it was not theoretical theology. It was an urgent, pressing reality for everyone sitting in those pews.
That sets the tone perfectly for the first massive concept he tackles, which is the swiftness of light.
The sheer velocity of time.
Yeah. He begins walking his audience through what he calls a Bible gallery of old paintings, and he pulls his first illustration directly from the book of Job. Job says, "My days are swifter than a post." Now, to bring this into a modern light, without getting bogged down, let's think about how we perceive speed today. If you want to send a message, you hit a button on a glass screen.
And a signal bounces off a satellite or routes through a fiber optic cable.
And it reaches the other side of the globe in a fraction of a second. We are completely numb to that kind of instant data transfer. But I want to compare our digital numbness to the ancient marvel of the Eastern Post writers that Job and Spurgeon are actually referencing.
The contrast is brilliant because it forces us to look at the physical mechanics of speed. In the ancient East, particularly in the Persian and Roman empires, the relay of post horses was the absolute pinnacle of human logistical speed.
It was a huge deal.
It was a massive, expensive undertaking. They built these incredible royal roads, and stationed along them at regular intervals were outposts with fresh, well-fed horses and rested riders. So a courier would arrive in a cloud of dust on an exhausted, foaming horse that had been run to its absolute physical limit. The courier would leap off, toss the heavy leather mail pouch to the next rider, who would instantly vault onto a fresh horse and just take off at a full gallop.
And they did not stop for rain. They did not stop for scorching heat. They did not stop for nightfall. It was continuous, unbroken, violent forward motion.
Right. And Spurgeon takes that historical reality and maps it directly onto our birthdays.
Yeah, he tells his audience that we ride 1 year until it is completely worn out. Think about late December. The horse of that current year is exhausted, stumbling, winded, and then at the stroke of midnight, a new birthday or a new year arrives.
There is another steed waiting.
Yes. We do not get a vacation. We do not get to sit in the post house and drink water for a month. We vault onto the next year, always hurrying onward.
The defining characteristic of that metaphor is the absolute lack of a pause button. Spurgeon specifically notes that we are not riding in a slow, lumbering wagon dragging along a muddy dirt road with tiresome wheels.
Right, it's not a casual ride.
Not at all. The transition from one year to the next is instantaneous. Time forces us into the saddle of the next 12 months. Whether we feel mature enough, financially secure enough, or emotionally ready for it, the new horse is already galloping.
He then turns up the dial on the imagery. He shifts from the dusty roads of the ancient East to the open ocean.
Okay.
He points out another phrase from Job, calling our days swift ships, or, as some scholars translate it, ships of desire. Spurgeon paints this picture of vessels hurrying home, incredibly anxious for the haven, crowding on every single piece of canvas sail they have.
They are cutting through the heavy billows.
Yeah, leaving a white furrow of boiling sea behind them, pushed relentlessly by the wind.
It is a picture of incredible momentum. The massive sails are taut, the wood is groaning, and the ship is being driven forward by a sheer physical force that the sailors themselves cannot generate.
But I want to push back on this a little bit because I think it hits a nerve.
Yeah.
For you, for me, for anyone listening right now, we often feel like we are at the steering wheel of our own lives. We do. We set our 5-year goals, we pick our careers, we choose what city we want to live in, we decide when to buy a house. We feel like we have the rudder firmly in our own hands. So why does Spurgeon insist with such finality that we are being driven by the wind of time? Doesn't that risk making his audience feel like passive victims of their own lives?
That tension is why the metaphor is so brilliant. It is a necessary provocation. Spurgeon acknowledges that we do have a rudder. We do make choices.
Okay.
He even says we can direct our course to some degree, or we might even hoist what he calls the small sails of sin that might hurry our days faster toward destruction. So human agency is not erased.
Right.
But the fundamental, unavoidable reality he is highlighting is that you are not generating the forward motion of time itself. The wind is an external, unyielding force.
You cannot drop anchor in the middle of your 30s and decide you're going to stay 35 for the next 2 decades.
Spot on. The wind is blowing, the ship is moving, and you are being carried toward a final haven, regardless of how expertly you adjust the rigging. Your choices matter for the condition of the ship, but they cannot stop the ocean from moving beneath you.
That distinction makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
You control the rudder, but you cannot control the wind. And that leads directly into his next illustration, which is arguably the most aggressive one in the entire first segment.
Yeah, he looks up away from the ocean and into the sky.
Right. He talks about an eagle swooping down. But it is not just an eagle gliding around on a sunny, peaceful afternoon. It's an eagle hasting to the prey.
What's fascinating here is how Spurgeon assigns the roles in this terrifying little drama. He uses an anecdote describing a scenario where an eagle attacks a fish hawk.
I love this part.
The hawk has just successfully pulled a fish out of the water and is flying high in the air enjoying its catch. But then the eagle attacks the hawk, forcing the hawk to drop the fish. The fish starts falling back toward the ocean, but before that fish can even hit the water, the eagle dives and catches it in midair.
The imagery is just cinematic. The eagle flies faster than gravity. The fish is in a literal freefall, plummeting toward the ocean, and the eagle overtakes it.
And he says life is fleeing from insatiate death. We are the ones trying to outrun it, trying to evade it with medicine, with safety measures, with fitness routines.
We try so hard.
But death is the eagle. It is an apex predator, perfectly designed for the strike. It is too swift to be outrun. Spurgeon is using the raw violence of nature to prove a theological point. No matter how fast you think your life is moving, death is moving faster, and it will inevitably overtake its prey.
It is almost like Spurgeon is weaponizing nature against the listener's comfort. We usually look at an eagle as majestic, a symbol of freedom. But he forces the congregation to view it as the ultimate, inescapable predator.
It completely reframes how we view our own majestic ambitions.
Absolutely. And he continues this theme of inescapable speed by mentioning a weaver's shuttle, which is thrown back and forth across the loom so quickly the human eye can barely track its movement.
Right.
And then he brings up the wind itself. He contrasts a gentle, slow gale with a violent hurricane. He points out the tragic reality that for some people, life is a hurricane that snaps the ties of existence when they are just an infant.
Which completely shatters the default assumption that we all get a full, comfortable 80-year lifespan.
It really does.
The hurricane does not check your calendar. It does not care about your plans or your unfulfilled potential.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Spurgeon moves from these earthly metaphors of ancient horses, wooden ships, and diving eagles, and he introduces an astonishing physics illustration.
Yes, this part is brilliant.
Remember, this is 1855. Science and astronomy are making massive leaps in the public consciousness. So he tells his audience, you might be sitting still in this chapel, but you are all really in motion. He starts lecturing them on planetary mechanics.
He breaks down the rotation and the orbit of the Earth to a room full of 19th century churchgoers. It is a brilliant rhetorical pivot.
He points out that the globe is spinning on its axis, completing a full rotation every 24 hours. For context, if you were standing at the equator, that means you were spinning at roughly 1,000 miles per hour while just sitting in a chair reading a book.
It is so counterintuitive.
Right. But that is just the beginning. He notes that the Earth is simultaneously moving around the Sun. We are orbiting at about 67,000 miles per hour.
Just unbelievable speeds.
We are physically hurtling through the cold vacuum of space, and Spurgeon describes this as being carried along by a giant angel with broad outstretched wings, flapping to the blast, flying before the lightning.
If we connect this to the broader psychological picture, the weight of this reality is completely destabilizing.
Totally.
We sit in our living rooms, drinking our morning coffee, thinking we are perfectly stationary, we feel grounded, we feel secure. But it is a massive cosmic illusion. We are traveling through space at an incalculable rate, and Spurgeon argues that we are moving through time at the exact same terrifying velocity.
He delivers this line that just hits like a hammer. He says, your pulses each moment beat, the funeral marches to the tomb.
That specific phrasing carries such a heavy rhythmic cadence.
It is haunting.
Every single heartbeat, every thud in your chest is a drum step toward the grave. He tells the listener that they are chained to the chariot of rolling time.
Yeah.
You cannot bridle those horses. You cannot negotiate with them. You cannot leap from the chariot. You are a captive to the forward momentum of the universe itself.
But extreme velocity creates a secondary problem. When you are moving at 1,000 miles an hour, you aren't just fast. You are incredibly fragile.
Right. A pebble on the tracks can derail a speeding train.
Exactly. And that sheer vulnerability is where Spurgeon takes his audience next. This brings us to his second major theme. If the first segment was about the terrifying speed of time, the second is about the radical uncertainty of life.
It is not just moving fast, it is breathtakingly fragile.
He returns to his anchor text, James chapter 4, verse 14, which explicitly calls life a vapor.
To explain this concept of a vapor, he strips away all the high-minded academic theology and goes straight to a universal childhood memory. He asks the audience to picture a child blowing bubbles.
We have all done that or watched our kids do it. You dip the little plastic wand into the soapy water, you blow gently, and this beautiful iridescent sphere floats up into the air.
And the child is delighted.
Yeah, they're running after it, reaching for it, but it has absolutely zero structural integrity. It is a film of water holding air, balancing on a razor's edge of physical tension.
1 second, it is catching the sunlight, reflecting the whole world on its surface, and the next second, pop! It is completely gone.
Gone.
There is not even a trace of it left behind on the grass. You cannot reconstruct it. Spurgeon pairs that delicate image with the picture of morning mist rising from a river.
That is a great visual.
In the early dawn, especially in a damp climate like England, you see this thick, steamy exhalation covering the water. It looks solid. It looks like a physical barrier you can almost lean against. But the moment the sun breaches the horizon and the ambient temperature shifts by just a few degrees, it burns off and disappears entirely.
The biblical text says, it appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. It's so agonizingly fragile. And then he pulls another metaphor, this time from Ecclesiastes chapter 6, verse 12, which says, life is like a shadow.
A shadow is the absolute perfect representation of something that lacks actual substance.
Yeah.
You can see a shadow. It has a defined shape. It stretches. It moves. It appears to interact with the physical environment visually, but you cannot lay hold of it. When the person casting the shadow walks away, or when light source changes, the shadow ceases to exist instantly. It has no independent reality.
I have to say, Spurgeon's application of this idea is incredibly sharp.
Oh, absolutely.
It is where he really starts poking at human behavior. Because if life is a shadow, and all our earthly acquisitions are just extensions of that shadow, why do humans spend so much manic, exhaustive energy trying to hoard physical goods?
It is wild.
He paints this hilarious but tragic picture of a foolish man trying to stockpile shadows. He mocks the guy who gathers shadows into a room, piles them up to the ceiling, locks the door, and proudly declares, "These are mine, and they shall never depart."
It brilliantly exposes the absolute absurdity of materialism. Spurgeon is directly referencing the biblical parable of the rich fool.
Right. The man who looks at his massive harvest and says, I have much goods laid up for many years. I will take my ease, eat, drink, and be merry.
Spurgeon is pointing out that this man is trying to lock a shadow in a bank vault. You cannot catch a shadow, and you certainly cannot depend on it for your future security. You cannot even reckon on a single moment because the light shifts and it melts away.
I want to talk directly to the listener here. Think about that massive promotion you are chasing right now, or that 30-year mortgage you just signed, or that retirement portfolio you check every single morning. We spend decades hoarding vapor.
We really do.
We feel like we are pouring concrete, but Spurgeon is looking right at you saying, you are filling a room with shadows. We pile up these transient things, entirely forgetting that the thread holding us to this reality could be severed at any second, which ties directly into King Hezekiah's metaphor in Isaiah chapter 38.
Hezekiah compares his life to a weaver's thread. A weaver is working on a massive wooden loom, pulling the thread incredibly tight to create the fabric.
So there is immense tension on that line.
Huge tension. And with one tiny, almost effortless motion of a blade, the thread is severed, the tension is gone instantly, the connection is broken forever.
What strikes me about the cut thread metaphor is the suddenness of it and how it directly assaults our modern sensibilities. Mankind desperately wants to know what life will be while we have it.
We crave that knowledge.
We want to read the whole schematic before we even start building the machine. We obsess over 5-year plans and 10-year projections. We try to plan for a future that can literally be snipped while we are holding the scissors.
This raises an important question about our cultural obsession with forecasting and control. We crave certainty. We want guarantees about our careers, the health of our children, the stability of our investments.
We buy insurance for everything.
Right. But Spurgeon is relentlessly tearing down that false sense of security. He is forcing the listener to confront the fact that they are balancing on a razor's edge. Your life is not a steel cable. It is a thread under tension, waiting for the blade.
Even if the thread is not cut today, the line it follows is never straight. And that brings us to Spurgeon's third major category, which is the relentless changes of life.
Yeah. Yes.
He moves from the speed of time to the fragility of our existence, and now he lands on the constant, chaotic shifting of our daily circumstances. He pulls up the patriarch Jacob from the 47th chapter of Genesis. Jacob is 130 years old, standing in the opulent court of Pharaoh, arguably the highest ruler on earth.
Yeah.
And when Pharaoh asks his age, Jacob calls his days a pilgrimage.
The concept of a pilgrimage is vital to understand here. A pilgrim is not a tourist on a guided, all-inclusive vacation. A pilgrim is someone on a long, arduous, highly dangerous trek toward a specific destination.
They do not know what the road ahead looks like.
No, and they certainly do not expect it to be comfortable.
Spurgeon paints this incredibly vivid picture of the environmental shifts a pilgrim faces. He takes the audience through a staggering geographic whiplash. One minute you're walking by silver brooks, the air is balmy, the trees are green and lush, and you're plucking ripe fruit right off the branch.
You feel like you have arrived. You feel safe.
And then, without any warning whatsoever, the terrain shifts. Suddenly, you are stumbling through an arid desert.
Completely different environment.
There is burning sand blistering your feet, a scorching, white-hot sky above you. There is no house, no roof, no shelter. The only sound you can hear is the screech of a wild eagle circling overhead. You are parched and terrified. Then, miraculously, you stumble into an oasis. You catch your breath. Then you are forced to climb a high hill, the rugged hill of Bashan. Then you are descending into a dark, claustrophobic gorge between jagged rocks. Then you are in the mountains of leopards, surrounded by predators and unseen affliction. It is constant, radical, unpredictable change.
But notice the theological comfort Spurgeon injects right into the middle of this chaos. He looks back at the history of Israel's 40 years of wandering in the wilderness.
Right.
To a human observer, wandering in a brutal desert for 4 decades seems like an absolute failure of navigation. It seems like a colossal disaster. It looks like they are lost. But Spurgeon points out that this seemingly random wandering was, according to divine providence, the straightest way to Canaan.
That is such a counterintuitive thought. The winding, dangerous, leopard-infested road is actually the surest road to the destination.
Precisely. We cannot trace the underground river we are sailing on, and we cannot track the winding roads ahead of us, but the believer knows where those roads conclude. The pilgrim's path, with all its terrifying environmental shifts, sudden storms, and agonizing delays, is in the end a safe route guided by a sovereign hand. The chaos is a curated chaos.
I love how he shifts gears here from the physical landscape to the literary landscape. He brings up Psalm 90, verse 9, where the psalmist says we spend our years as a tale that is told.
Okay.
Now, Spurgeon admits something pretty funny here. For a prominent, respected 19th century preacher, he confesses to the congregation that he spent time reading what he calls a foolish book, The Arabian Nights.
It is a phenomenal moment of vulnerability and rhetorical skill. He is using a piece of sensational pop culture to make a very serious theological point. He connects with the audience on a surprisingly relatable level.
He talks about the genie, the fairies, the sudden drops into dark subterranean caverns, the bizarre glowing palaces that appear out of nowhere. He says that the history of human life is just as conglomerated and strange as those fictional tales.
Think about the structure of a human biography. We desperately want to believe our lives are a cohesive, well-plotted, logical novel. We want rising action, a clear climax, and a satisfying resolution.
Of course we do.
But in reality, they are completely erratic. Spurgeon notes that we move from merry rhymes to prosy subjects. We swing violently from the sublime to the ridiculous. You could not invent a stranger, more disjointed narrative than the actual lived experience of an average human being. Real life is infinitely weirder than fiction.
We truly do not know what the very next chapter holds. And to illustrate that lack of permanence, he brings up the image of the shepherd's tent from Isaiah chapter 38.
Okay, yeah.
A Bedouin shepherd in the ancient East builds a temporary hut out of skins and poles. It is functional, but it is incredibly flimsy. When the hot season arrives, or when the flock needs new pasture, or when a storm threatens, the tent is struck down in minutes and moved.
It has absolutely no foundation. You just pull up the pegs and leave.
Right.
This is a direct, targeted challenge to the listener who thinks they're settling down. Spurgeon specifically addresses the successful business owner who just opened a new shop, or the person who took over their family's old established business.
Yeah.
They sign a lease, they buy the property, and they think, well, I am going to put down roots here. I am secure. This is my legacy.
Right.
But Spurgeon looks right at them and says, no, you have no abiding city. Your life is a temporary shepherd's hut. You could be moved to another situation, another county, or another state of being entirely before you even realize what is happening. The pegs can be pulled up tonight.
It brings to mind the famous quote he pulls from the ancient Greek lawmaker Solon. Solon supposedly told the incredibly wealthy King Croesus, "No man ought to be called a happy man till he dies."
Solon's logic was purely secular, based entirely on observation. He observed that fortune is so incredibly fickle, a man could be a wealthy king ruling an empire one day and a defeated, starving beggar the next.
Well...
Therefore, you cannot evaluate a man's overall happiness or success until his story is completely over, because absolute tragedy could strike in the final act and erase all previous joy.
But Spurgeon flips that secular dread on its head. He contrasts Solon's anxiety with Christian confidence. He argues that a Christian can always call themselves happy right now, right in the middle of the story, regardless of what the final act holds.
Where's that?
Because wherever their fragile, temporary tent is carried, God acts as a wall of fire round about them.
The security does not come from the structural integrity of the tent itself. The security comes from the divine fire surrounding it. The physical circumstances are constantly shifting. The wind blows, the rain falls, the ground shakes. But the spiritual protection remains absolute.
He shares this striking historical anecdote about Julius Caesar to drive this point home. Caesar is in a small boat, caught in a terrible, violent storm on the sea. The sailors are absolutely terrified, weeping, convinced the boat is going to shatter and they're all going to drown.
Understandably so.
And Caesar stands up in the middle of the storm and tells them, "Fear not, thou carriest Caesar and all his fortunes." He genuinely believed his own historical destiny was so great, so inevitable, that the ocean itself could not possibly swallow him.
It is the ultimate display of monumental human hubris. Caesar thinks his own greatness commands the weather.
He really does. But Spurgeon uses it as a brilliant mirror for the believer. He says, if a pagan emperor could speak with that kind of arrogant confidence based solely on his own earthly destiny, how much more confidence should a believer have when they are carrying Jesus Christ in their boat?
Oh, that is good.
You must sink or swim with him. If the Lord of the universe is in the boat with you, it absolutely does not matter where your tent is pitched or how violently the storm is blowing. The outcome is secured by the passenger. not the vessel.
That shifts the listener's perspective entirely away from their changing circumstances and places it firmly on the unchanging nature of the one who accompanies them. It is a massive psychological relief.
But our minds still fight against this. Even with that comfort, we still try to figure out the future. We still obsess over tomorrow. Spurgeon brings up the metaphor of a bizarre dream to show how utterly useless our worrying is. In dreams, the laws of physics and the rules of logic are completely suspended. He talks about a dream where you are sitting at a lavish feast and suddenly the food turns into a winged horse, or you shrink down and become a morsel for a monster.
The shifts happen with zero logic.
Yeah.
In the waking world, the shifts of providence can feel just as disjointed. Men are rich one day, beggars the next. Monarchs are exiled and scoundrels are exalted to thrones. It is as variable as dead leaves blowing in an autumn wind. You cannot predict the pattern.
And because we hate that lack of logic, because we hate feeling out of control, we try to peer into the future. This leads to my absolute favorite analogy in the entire text. Spurgeon pictures a man holding a spyglass or a telescope, desperate to see what is coming down the road.
Okay.
But the man is so anxious, so worked up about the unknown, that he is breathing heavily. His hot, anxious breath hits the cold glass of the telescope lens.
It is a devastatingly accurate observation of human psychology.
It is so incredibly practical. By breathing his anxiety onto the lens, he fogs up the very glass he is trying to look through. Instead of seeing the future clearly, all he sees are the thick clouds and darkness created by his own panic. His fear manufactures the fog.
This raises an important question for the listener. Why do we do this?
Right.
Spurgeon asks why we conjure black fiends from the deep unknown instead of resting on clear promises. We literally invent tragedies in our minds that have not happened yet.
All the time.
We imagine the worst-case scenario for our health, our kids, our jobs. We fog up our own vision with these phantom terrors, and in doing so, we completely miss the clear, bright promises that are standing right in front of us. We choose forebodings over facts.
Turn your fancies out of doors, he commands his audience. It is such a practical, authoritative command. Stop trying to look through the fogged-up telescope. Stop inventing monsters in the dark. Which brings us to the final, heaviest segment of the text.
The finality and conclusion of life.
Yeah. What is the actual end of this incredibly fast, utterly uncertain, constantly shifting pilgrimage? Where does the rushing chariot actually stop?
He does not soften the blow here at all. He turns to the Old Testament, specifically 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 14.
So what does this all mean?
Well, the text says, "We must needs die, and are as water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again."
To make this ancient text visceral for his London audience, Spurgeon uses the image of a melting icicle. He says man is a great icicle, constantly being thawed by the sun of time.
Think about the physical mechanics of that image. An icicle hanging from a roof during winter seems incredibly solid. It has a sharp edge. It looks like a weapon.
Right.
But the ambient temperature is always relentlessly working against it. Even if you cannot see it melting in real time, it is constantly dripping, losing its mass drop by drop. And once it completely melts and the water hits the dirt below, the structural integrity is gone.
The phase change is permanent. Once the water hits the ground, you cannot put vitality back into the human heart. You cannot inflate the lungs with a new breath of life. The water is spilt on the ground, soaking into the dry dirt. No one can gather it back into a cup. The place that knew us will know us no more. It is a terrifying biological reality.
It is a chilling picture of irreversible finality. The clock stops, the forward motion ceases, the tent is packed up permanently, and the peg will never be driven into the sand again.
I have to ask, though, if we were just melting icicles, if our time is just going to soak into the dirt and disappear, why bother building anything? Why preach a sermon? Why start a family? Doesn't this immense focus on finality lead to complete paralysis?
That is the exact trap Spurgeon is trying to avoid by explaining the theological destination of that water. He does not stop at the dirt.
Okay.
If the story ended with the water soaking into the mud, then yes, nihilism would be the only logical response. But he traces the trek of that water after it hits the ground. He says there are two distinct eternal paths for this water once it sinks into the soil.
Right. The physical body is done, but the soul's trajectory continues.
Exactly. On one hand, he says the water can filter through the rock of ages. It can percolate down through that solid divine foundation, being filtered and cleansed of all its impurities, and eventually spring up as a pure fountain in heaven, made clear as crystal. It is a picture of total purification and eternal renewal.
But the alternative he presents is absolutely terrifying.
He says the water could instead percolate through the black earth of sin. Instead of being purified, it absorbs the toxicity of the soil, sinking deeper and deeper, until it hangs in horrid, polluted drops in the dark caverns of destruction.
The sensory imagery there is so visceral. Horrid drops in dark caverns. It makes you physically shudder just thinking about it.
And that is the underlying reason behind this entire barrage of metaphors. Spurgeon is not trying to depress his audience or paralyze them with fear. He is using this intense, relentless, violent language to force a realization. He wants the listener to feel the sheer terror of their own fleeting days so that they will make the absolute best use of them. He is systematically destroying their reliance on their own earthly stability so they will be forced to rely entirely on divine strength. He wants to cure their apathy by showing them the cliff.
It is an incredible, life-altering wake-up call from a 20-year-old kid. When you step back and look at the sheer volume of imagery we just covered in this deep dive, it is staggering.
It really is.
We started with ancient post riders galloping through the night, exhausting horse after horse. We looked at ships of desire crashing through heavy ocean waves, driven by an unseen wind. We saw an eagle swooping down faster than gravity to snatch a falling fish.
Yeah, we imagined ourselves sitting in a pew while hurtling through the vacuum of space at 67,000 miles per hour.
We watched soap bubbles vanish in the sun and foolish men trying to lock empty shadows in a room. We felt the geographic whiplash of the pilgrim's path, the temporary nature of the shepherd's tent, the anxiety of the fogged-up telescope, and finally, the melting icicle dripping its last drop onto the soil.
Every single one of those images is precisely designed to strip away the illusion that we have an endless supply of time. They are all attacking the same human falsehood from different angles.
And that leads me directly to you, the listener. We have talked a lot about the velocity of ancient couriers and the massive orbits of planets, but the truth is the velocity of your own life is absolutely the same.
The wind is pushing your ship right now.
Yeah, the sun is thawing your icicle as you listen to this. The chariot is rolling forward and you cannot jump out.
The clock is ticking, and the thread is under tension.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something built right on the edge of Spurgeon's logic. If our lives are literally melting away and time cannot be gathered up again once it hits the dirt, how does that alter the way you will spend the very next hour of your day?
That is a big question.
What if the intense brevity of your life isn't a reason for anxiety, panic, or paralysis, but the very reason your daily actions carry such a massive, eternal weight? The fact that you only have today is what makes today so incredibly valuable. Think about that as you step back out into the rushing wind of your own schedule. Thanks for listening to Reformed Thinking. We will catch you on the next one.